Oscar. Margaret went about her day as if it were any other day, just as she had since she found her new best friend, her new pet, Oscar. Margaret lives in a small home out in the country about 3 miles or so from the little town of Brewster, Wisconsin. Margaret keeps busy working on her arts and crafts, and she would sell them at the local flea market as a source of income. Margaret had never married and always seemed quite content according to the locals. However, deep in Margaret's heart, she was lonely and longed for love. One evening, while quietly reading by the living room fire, she heard what sounded like a jet passing close to her home, then a large boom or crashing sound. Margaret immediately jumped up and looked outside her home. In a large field behind her home, she saw a reddish glow coming from what appeared to be an impact site. Alarmed that it could be a jet crash, Margaret ran toward the impact site, but as she approached, she stopped in amazement. It wasn't a jet crash. It was a meteor that had crashed in her backyard. Margaret slowly and cautiously approached the meteor. It had a reddish glow and it smelled a lot like sulfur. Margaret thought it would be best to report this to someone as soon as possible. But at that very moment, Margaret saw something move. Something that was crawling out of the meteor. At first, Margaret was ready to run for the hills, but she heard a soft purring sound coming from the creature. It had large, bright eyes, a short, stubby tail, and looked quite like a small teddy bear. The creature seemed to be reaching out to Margaret as if it needed help or reassurance to know that it was safe. Margaret took the small little alien creature back to her home. She fed the creature some warm milk and a few small pieces of bread, and then wrapped it in a small blanket to keep it warm. As she held the creature in her lap and she looked into its big brown eyes, it seemed to smile at her as it softly purred. She had reassured herself that in the morning she'd notify the authorities. Well, things started to change. By this, I mean Margaret was starting to get attached to the small little alien creature. The little teddy bear-like creature seemed to want and need Margaret to hold, cuddle, and love it. Was this what she'd been missing all of her life? Was these type of feelings for someone or something else love? Her heart never felt so warm or fulfilled. Looking down at her newfound companion, she decided she would name him Oscar. Yes, Oscar from outer space, she chuckled to herself. Margaret and Oscar became more than owner and pet. No, Oscar was special. Why, Oscar would actually show emotions. He would smile when he was happy, frown when he was disappointed, and even winked whenever Margaret entered the room. On one particular cold day, the furnace went out, and Margaret had to call one of the local servicemen to come out and check it. Margaret informed the serviceman the broken furnace was in the basement and to be careful as the steps were quite old. Margaret then went about her daily business of making her arts and craft to sell at the market. She stopped dead in her tracks when she heard a horrific scream and crashing sound coming from the basement. She stood at the top of the stairs calling out for the repairman, but there was no response. Panicked, Margaret slowly descended the old stairs. What she saw next shocked her. The entire basement was covered in blood, body parts were strewn everywhere, and in the midst of it all sat Oscar. He turned towards Margaret, winked, and smiled. What the hell had happened here, she thought. How could Oscar have done this to a grown man? Was she dreaming? Oscar ran towards Margaret, jumped into her arms, and began to purr. No way, she thought. No way sweet Oscar could have ever have done this. It had to have been some insane accident. How could she ever explain all of this? Who'd believe her? What would the authorities do with Oscar? Margaret did what any other red-blooded, totally in love woman would do. Well, she decided to cover it all up. Margaret drove the serviceman's truck into the backyard pond. It was deep enough that no one would ever find it, and of course, it appeared Oscar would devour, well, what was remaining of the serviceman. There was some fuss about town concerning the missing man. No one ever suspected or even asked Margaret anything about it. Well, that was until several weeks later. Margaret heard a knock on the front door. It was a young, well-dressed man identifying himself as a police detective. and he was working on a missing persons case. The detective asked if she had heard of the missing man from town, and Margaret acknowledged she had heard the rumors. The detective asked if the man had ever arrived at her home, as he was on her service schedule. Margaret told the detective that yes, he had done the repairs to the furnace in the basement, and then he left. The detective asked if he could look around the basement to perhaps find a clue as to the man's disappearance. The hair on the back of Margaret's neck stood up. Her thoughts ran wild. Had she cleaned everything up? Would he find out about Oscar? Right this way, she said to the detective, and be careful. The steps are old. Margaret opened the basement door and snapped on the light and directed the detective to the back corner of the basement. Margaret smiled to herself this time, thinking, yes, there's plenty of room in the pond for one more car, and after all, she had neglected to feed Oscar lunch earlier. As Margaret looked in Oscar's beautiful eyes, she thought to herself, isn't love grand?